Due to yesterday's technical difficulties, Joe and Hannah have graciously allowed me to take a mulligan. I do think that the slides, the images, and the text, many of which come from CCP documents, are powerful, and they could be useful resources for others who are engaged in this work. Um, so again, the talk is Uyghurs are Uyghurs, they aren't Muslim, and we must make this concept clear. Secular conversions in Xinjiang. This talk has three main objectives. First, it examines one and only one component of the state violence that's being targeted towards Uyghurs and Kazakhs. In this form is religious repression. Second, it documents instances of CCP policies that prohibit or significantly limit normal religious practice amongst these communities. And finally, it assesses how these policies may impact current and future generations of observant Uyghurs and Kazakhs. Uyghur expressions of Islam are diverse, and this slide is an attempt to capture the diversity of pious expressions amongst devout Uyghurs. And it's precisely the forms of religious expression, of devout expression, that have attracted the attention of CCP officials, especially in the last decade and a half. Now, to be sure, the Chinese Constitution allows the freedom of belief to all Chinese citizens. But of course, as Article 36 states, or doesn't state, this freedom isn't extended to the realm of religious practice or devout expressions. So this talk takes us through a spatial exploration of devout expressions, starting with the public and then ending with the individual or personal forms of piety. And we'll see how CCP policy targets each level of these expressions of devotion. Beginning in the early 2010s, the CCP already began to clamp down on forms of religious expressions or religious activities. And when I was still traveling to the region regularly in 2010, from 2010 to 2017, one would notice these posters hung outside every religious site in the region. At this time, there were 23. I believe the number of illegal religious activities has been extended to 24. And you'll see as the list continues, they become more and more ambiguous. For example, item number 23 on this poster is using religion to organize activities that can, quote, hinder social order. Now, despite the obvious, I think, forms of control amongst faith-based groups in Xinjiang, especially Uyghurs and Kazakhs, Chinese state media will often tout the number of mosques, which stands officially at 24,000, but as Nathan and Jim Leibel have pointed out, in the previous in a previous talk in this panel, is that many of these have been destroyed or significantly damaged. But my point is that the number of mosques, and citing this number, doesn't actually provide any sort of useful information about what activities are allowed to occur in the mosques, nor does it provide information about who's allowed to enter the mosques to engage in religious activities. Now, of course, on the outside of every mosque, you'll see surveillance cameras. They're not just installed for quote-unquote security reasons, but rather they document and record who enters and who exits the mosque. And as we'll see in a later slide, most mosques interiors are also equipped with surveillance cameras in order for authorities to understand what types of messages are being promoted amongst faithful. So who actually goes to mosques to pray, and under what conditions? Of course, with the surveillance cameras outside the mosques and them being installed as Uyghurs, especially Uyghur men, were being detained in large numbers, many simply refused to engage in any sort of public religious practice, including prayer at a mosque. And of course, we've known now for quite some time that all minors, college students, and anyone employed by the government and their immediate relatives are forbidden from praying inside the mosque. And here we have a sign that was affixed outside of a small mosque in Turpan that states quite clearly that minors are not allowed to enter the mosque. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, now the activities within the mosques are being recorded and monitored. And in these urban areas, there are these centralized locations where all mosque activities can be observed by officials. In rural areas that haven't been equipped with these high-tech surveillance equipment, usually it's the responsibility of the so-called the Fanghuiju, or the sent-down worker teams, who will staff people or assign the sent-down family workers to the outsides of mosques, where they'll be responsible for documenting who enters, who leaves, how many times a day or a week an individual enters the mosques, and they'll also observe what's going on inside the mosque, especially the Friday sermons. And of course, as Nathan has demonstrated quite convincingly, mosques are being destroyed. And here's just one other instance to add to the growing amount of evidence of the destruction of holy sites in the region. This comes from a Chinese official who noted that in the village that he was assigned to, the number of mosques was adjusted, and what he really means was destroyed from 10 to 4 because of new concentrated residential living. And we don't have time to get into the details and the lasting effects of the destruction of mosques and then reorganizing Uyghur communities in these so-called concentrated residential living spaces. But they also these destruction of the mosque and these new living spaces also break apart the jama'at, or the religious kind of community that is based around mosque attendance. So continuing with public forms of religious expression, I've included Ramadan. Now, many may argue that Ramadan is a personal expression of piety, but I contest that although fasting is an individual endeavor, that the entire month requires the support of a community, not just the family preparing meals, but you actually have this sense of social cohesion that really culminates at the end of the daily fast. But in any event, we see that the restrictions on who can fast during Ramadan have been extended. And so in addition to minors and individuals who have or who are employed with the government, there are now wider restrictions on placed on fasting. So guardians at some elementary schools pledge not to fast during Ramadan. They also promise to provide 3 meals a day to their children and tell them the benefits of the habit. And they vow to keep them from any religious activities, especially during the month of Ramadan. Retired teachers in many locales are now also prohibited from fasting during Ramadan, and those, even though they're retired, if they decide to fast during the Ramadan, they run the risk of being identified or labeled as a two-faced person. Other locales, take advantage of the sent-down workers, the Fanghuiju workers, and they organize public meals in which they quote-unquote invite everyone to attend. So it has the illusion of it being voluntary, but of course, again, with everything occurring against the backdrop of mass incarcerations and mass detentions, the space of personal freedoms and personal choice, I think, is greatly inhibited. And again, we see a lot of these restrictions occurring inside schools, and as schools branch out to the community. So Uyghur teachers pledge that neither uh, they nor their families will fast or wear religious clothing. So I tried to simplify the previous slide in a very, very rough flow chart. And if we follow it very quickly, we see that many people within the Uyghur and Kazakh communities are just prohibited to fast. It's illegal. And then uh, some locales have, I think, stricter restrictions on Ramadan fasting, as you'll see. And even if it's permissible, at least legally permissible, to fast, and in more cases than not, you're at least discouraged from fasting. So now let's transition to private piety, and what I mean by that is religious expressions that occur within the home. And the CCP has quite literally taken its reach from the public sphere and stretched it into private homes. And this comes mainly in the form of the sweeps for quote unquote illegal religious articles. So, what law enforcement have been tasked to do is sweep homes in search for sacred items. And again, although there may be a rare instance where they'll find something of true extremist nature, that law enforcement personnel are responsible for finding items such as prayer rugs, as sacred texts, or maybe even something as mundane as a pitcher used for ablutions. So it's the physical removal of these sacred items from the home, again, to make the Uyghur house and Kazakh houses more secular. In addition to removing sacred items from Uyghur and Kazakh homes, uh, observant families, are required to go through processes of approval in order to hold the four major life cycle rituals that are common in Muslim communities. They're known in shorthand in Chinese documents as the four activities. They refer specifically to name giving ceremonies, circumcisions, weddings, and funerals. Once entirely a private affair, they are now required to get state approval. In addition to being granted state approval, a party representative has to attend the event, and it's the party official who then chooses a patriotic religious cleric if one is needed. And in many instances, especially in rural areas, residents are encouraged to take the ceremonies away from the home and instead hold them in villager activity centers, which are essentially concrete capsules that have been created by the state. I want to take us quickly through the next few slides and just provide some basic background information about the three news campaigns, because it's the three news campaigns that have really inspired a lot of the anti-religious policies that are occurring in rural Uyghur and Kazakh communities. Even a cursory look at the party documents that lay out the goals of the three news campaigns shows quite clearly that one of the priorities is to secularize Uyghur and Kazakh communities. And as we see, subpoint B in the constructing a new order being one of the three news, it's been entirely devoted to religious expressions, religious belief, and I think more importantly and more revealing, the quote unquote courage for a secular lifestyle. So this type of worldview is being valorized by the Chinese Communist Party. The previous few slides has demonstrated how the CCP has removed what I consider to be kind of exterior sacred elements for the Uyghur homes. In other words, religious literature, prayer rugs, as we saw, wash basins, and then even now encouraging Uyghur families and Kazakh families to hold important life cycle rituals outside the home. The next few slides, we're going to see how the home itself is being transformed from a socio-sacred space to a secular space. And this is being accomplished by the removal of one important item of the Uyghur home, and that's the supa, or raised platform, often made of earth, that is really the center of social and kind of sacred life of the Uyghur home that's usually built in the dalan, or the living room. These images show a blueprint for indigenous ordering of spaces typical among Uyghur communities. They're referred to in architectural literature as either ringy or loopy blueprints. But under the Three News campaign and the imposition of new housing projects, Uyghur homes have to conform to the three separate spaces model, either in new constructions or if the houses are being renovated. And the three separate spaces model has clearly defined residential areas, so where the family lives, growing areas, which are spaces for a small garden, and then rearing areas where families can have, a small number of domesticated animals. More importantly, but I first need to add that the three separate spaces blueprint for Uyghur and Kazakh home replaces the ringy and loopy syntax with a linear blueprint. But beyond that, I think the most important element or policy of the Three News campaign, as it's been imposed in Uyghur homes and Kazakh homes, is the removal of the supa. And quite literally the destruction of the supa, and then again, supa being really the heart of social interactions in these homes, and also sometimes the place for sacred rituals. And here we see Uyghurs under the supervision of sent down workers, quite literally removing and destroying the supa in their home. I've also heard that the miqrab, or the area in the home, the arch in the home that indicates the qibla, or the direction of Mecca, also needs to either be filled in if if the home's being renovated, and in new constructions, I haven't seen a miqrab being featured. Now, I haven't been able to confirm this in Chinese official documents, but RFA did post an article stating that this is now law, that miqrabs have been outlawed. Finally, I want to take us to examples of restrictions placed on personal piety. So again, we're right now on the spatial exploration of religious oppression in Uyghur and Kazakh communities. We've gone from the public to the private, and by private I meant the types of religious activities that occur within the home. And now I want to center our attention on individual piety and how that was expressed, and then restrictions on these expressions. Perhaps the most obvious of these restrictions occur in sartorial practices, especially among Uyghur and Kazakh women. So by the early 2010s, and really even starting in the early 2000s, Uyghur women were beginning to adopt a variety of styles of head coverings and clothing. And having interviewed many Uyghur women who either decided to don head coverings or change their style, for them it was a way of expressing a new modernity, a modernity that was being defined elsewhere, maybe in Egypt or in Turkey or in Indonesia. So this kind of a Muslim modernity. So again, they didn't consider themselves taking a step back in time. But with the Project Beauty campaign of 2013 and 2014, many forms of these new religious head coverings were being banned and being replaced by what authorities determined was traditional ethnic clothing of Uyghurs. More specifically, atlas dress, dopa, long hair, and more specifically still, long hair that was braided. Now, kind of ironically, speaking with young Uyghur women, that these were the outdated, old-fashioned styles, and these were the fashions of their mothers and grandmothers. So, many young Uyghur women were kind of put off by these fashion styles that were being encouraged and imposed in their communities. However, we see a change again with the Three News campaign, right? So, with the imposition of the Three News campaign, we see another transition in the types of sartorial practices that are encouraged and approved by CCP authorities. The Three News campaign has inspired a proliferation of state-built beauty salons, and these beauty salons attempt to modernize Uyghur women. So no longer are the atlas, dopa, and long hair and braids being encouraged, but rather new kind of cosmopolitan, globalized, or maybe even Han-defined standards of beauty are now being introduced and, in a certain extent, imposed in Uyghur communities. Therefore, beauty pageants that are staged in rural Uyghur and Kazakh communities now look very differently than they did, just a mere 6 or 7 years ago. So it's not atlas, dopa, long braids that are being showcased, but rather this ultra modern cosmopolitan Uyghur women who has replaced ethnic clothing with this completely secularized, non-ethnic style of dress. I need to go very, very quickly now because I'm running beyond my allotted time, even though this is a recording. But I think this gets to the essence of CCP efforts to secularize Uyghur and Kazakhs, and it goes to the name, right? This is kind of the very essential part of individual identity. The picture shows names that were featured in a Uyghur naming handbook that was published by a state press. And here we can find names like Hajim, Imam, Muhammad, and Mehmet, which are Turkic variants of the Prophet Muhammad, and even find the names of the Prophet's wives. However, overtly religious names became outlawed, and as a response, Uyghur parents began to change the names of their sons and daughters who had names that had religious connotations to them. And these images come from Xinjiang Daily, and I've just omitted their state ID numbers and their addresses, but we see again the response from Uyghur communities and how they changed the name. So one states my son's former name was Qadruddin Mahmud, a variant of Muhammad. I changed his name to Qadruddin Mehmet Yusuf. I was named Abdul Bakr Qadir, Abdul Bakr, of course, in reference of one of the four rightly guided caliphs. From this day forward, my name is Asghar Qadir. My daughter's original name was Aisha, name of one of the Prophet's wives. I changed her name to Arzugul. I want to conclude by taking us back to the beginning of this talk, and more specifically to the quote that was provided by a Uyghur official in Marlabashi County. He says, if we aren't Muslims and we are atheists, why must we invite clerics to engage in religious rituals at name-giving ceremonies, circumcisions, weddings, and funerals? Why do you wish to eat halal? But then he takes these ideas and he extends them a giant leap further. He adds in Chinese, Uyghurs are Uyghurs, they aren't Muslim, and we need to make this concept clear. I think this really gets to the core of the CCP's campaign to secularize Uyghur and Cossack communities. At one time, they were celebrated as two of the 10 quote unquote Muslim ethnic groups or ethno-national groups in China, but this is no longer acceptable. Rather, the religious components of their identity need to be removed in order for them to be fully compliant and participant in the Chinese nation or the Zhonghua Minzu. So I end the talk with a lot of anxiety about the future of the transmission of religious knowledge in Uyghur and Kazakh communities and the continuation of religious practice. Because I think what's more alarming than the assaults on exterior expressions of piety or the fact that these policies seek to weaken and sever the social spiritual roots that ground Uyghur and Kazakh identities to Islam. Thank you.